Hello, and welcome to the Best in Fintech podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Dimitri, founder and CEO of Trellis and Savvy Insurance. Typically, we're talking to fintech founders, but today is different, all about people and culture. The past few years have thrown a lot of change at fintech and insurtech leaders, including myself, trying to scale teams and build culture through a pandemic, and then a white-hot period of growth, investor enthusiasm, and then most recently, a challenge for tech-driven companies at all stages. I'm excited to have Crystal Boysen, Chief People Officer at Vimeo, on the show to impart some valuable people lessons at a time when we all really need them. So, Crystal, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Daniel. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, you've had an interesting career. You started off in consulting firms like that we've all heard of, KPMG, Deloitte, and then moving into increasingly big people leadership roles. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you decided to double down in HR?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had sort of a very non-linear kind of journey so far. But yeah, I actually started, which sometimes folks find it hard to believe, in technology. So my undergraduate degree was actually management information systems. So that led me into tech consulting at the companies you mentioned, KPMG and Deloitte. And I actually enjoyed that work for a few years and was kind of moving up the consulting ladder, if you will. But, kind of also realizing internal audit controls, I think it was the height of Sarbanes-Oxley. I didn't love that work, but what I did love about my roles was leading people, leading technology. So part of my role at Deloitte was actually leading their tech weeks facilitation. So I was a master facilitator for Deloitte and teaching them all things technology and whatnot. And I loved that aspect. So over time, I just happened to have a unique opportunity to work on a project in Deloitte's internal talent development department is what they called it, but essentially a fancy name for HR, really honing in on being able to do more training and development for folks and lead a team. And then from there, I got hooked into HR and really never looked back. I think for me, it is all about, I love people. And I think you've got to be someone that loves people if you're in my role. And I love watching people grow and develop and nurturing others. And that's a big part of what the people function does and why we exist. So I think that was the calling. And then, like I said, I've been really fortunate to have some incredible opportunities spark from there. After being in Deloitte for a few years, I dabbled in a couple other startups and some bigger companies, and then Canva and now Vimeo, and really love what I do.
What is the right time to hire people leadership? How do you know it's time to bring a people leader in-house?
Probably before you even realize you need to do that, right?
Probably. So, 3 months before you realize it, is that the answer?
Exactly. Pretty much. That is a question that I often get from leaders, especially as you're growing and scaling. Is when's the right time to bring in someone in the people department? I mean, it really does depend on kind of the leadership and the size, but I think as a general rule of thumb, you probably need someone in HR, at least a generalist that can look a little bit over recruiting, can kind of help with the policies, process stuff fairly early on in your career. And I think or in your journey, I think it'll make your lives a lot easier. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you always need like a chief people officer when you're a little bit smaller. I do typically see an inflection point in companies when they're kind of tipping over that 100-person mark. Generally speaking, 100 to 150 is when you really need to make sure you have at least a foundational role or two in there for HR. Trust me, you'll thank me later. But whether it's recruiting as you start to hire up, or again, that like kind of broad brush HR generalist that can look over kind of, do you have the right systems, policies, process? You're going to be onboarding people. You're going to be making sure you're compliant in certain HR related things. So I'd say at a minimum there, but I'm biased. I know that, but it's good to bring us in early.
Do you have any tips or tricks for people who don't have a people department? What are things that we might be neglecting, or tools that we should be using that are, we use an ATS like Greenhouse, but are there other tools or tips of the trade that you would give to people who don't have a people officer?
Yeah, I'd say, at a bare minimum, especially if you're doing some hiring, and ATS is a good one to invest in right off the bat. It's going to make your life easier. And as you continue to grow and scale, you're going to grow that base of future candidates in the pool of candidates. So that's always a good resource to have at your fingertips. Also, like a core HR system, like an HRIS, which would be Bamboo is great for startups. Something that can help facilitate whether it's payroll, just your employee management, your filings, all of that. I think you tend to sometimes see an underinvestment in that area, but those HRISs can actually do a lot to keep your people data clean, give that data integrity, manage attrition, other key kind of stats you need to be watching. So I'd say an HRIS for sure. Those are probably the two most important ones right off the bat. And then over time, like a great performance management system goes a long, long way, helping kind of, manage your performance and reviews and calibrations and talent planning. But I'd say usually that's when you're a little bit more mature as an organization.
Interesting. So you think that at a 50-person company, doing it through spreadsheets and Word docs is sort of adequate for
probably
performance reviews?
At 50, I'd say much beyond that, it gets a lot. And also, speaking of systems, total reward. So how, a way to track and monitor merit increases and track compensation. Obviously, you should have a good payroll system regardless early on. That's probably day one, employee one. But I think as you start to grow, it's just that migration from spreadsheets to a system to facilitate the process. And then as you get a lot bigger, something to think about is, I'm an advocate of is watching out for some of those pay equity reviews and demographic reviews that make those systems a lot they make it a lot easier for you to do that, which are important as you grow and scale.
Are there any performance management tools that you recommend off the bat, or is just
we actually use Lattice here at Vimeo, and I've actually been pretty impressed. I can poke a hole in almost any HR system. None of them are perfect, but I really like. To me, I want it to be a really seamless user experience. I want a great user interface. I want it to be easy, simple. I don't want you to get bogged down in finding the right tabs and information. So if it's going to make our employees' life easier, I'm a fan, and I very much like the interface of Lattice. Culture Amp has a great product as well.
Totally. Cool. So I read an article in Business, I think it was in Business Insider the other week, about employees starting to get nervous. They see every day and I think there's management that's nervous too. Mm-hmm. Everyone's reading the Wall Street Journal or TechCrunch and seeing that like 3 startups and large scale companies too having layoffs or hiring freezes or whatnot. Mm-hmm. It's affecting companies at all stages, and it's been going on for a long time now. And so, how do you been thinking about maintaining a sense of normalcy, a sense of confidence? In a macro environment that lacks that confidence or that lacks the stability. How are you making decisions? How are you communicating with staff to foster trust in an environment where other companies are departing with employees?
Yeah, I mean it's a challenging environment. There's no doubt about that, and the just depressing news that comes out left and right from tech companies in particular is rough. I think one thing that luckily we have a great CEO and leader here at Vimeo who a core of our kind of being and our principles is around be real and transparency. So we try to be, as transparent with our employees as possible about, what we know and what we can control and what's not in our control and, where we should invest our time and energy in the things that we can control. So you'll see us kind of in particular double down on, look, here's what Vimeo is set out to accomplish. These are our goals. This is our mission. This is our vision. None of that is changing, right? And I think that's important. Like, so when everything is so chaotic and there are so many unknowns, my number one piece of advice is to kind of hone in on what's in your control as an employee and as an organization. So we keep really focused on the great work that we need to do and building our product roadmap and sharing our customer stories and our wins, but also being really open about, we are seeing maybe some headwinds that we hadn't seen before. And we're seeing challenges in the market with like longer sales cycles or whatever it may be, right, that are impacting our business. So I also think there's a balance there of like focus on what's in your control, but also, be transparent and share what you're comfortable sharing in terms of what are those challenges you're seeing that are maybe more externally driven. And, unfortunately, no one is immune to the external market right now.
How do you do planning? What's the relationship between the people team and the finance team? And so imagine your biggest customer calls you and says, hey, our advertising budget or our budget for the next quarter is slashed and you're going to see 30% or 50% reduction in revenue corporate wide because we were such a big account for you. How long would it take and what's the process by which you manage things and what do you do to prepare so that when that does happen, you're not caught flat-footed? Yeah. How are you continuously managing performance and initiatives and R&D so that you're prepared for that call, and how do you execute against that kind of a call?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's really, so we're about, over 1,200 global employees. And so we have a decent sized HR team right now. So it might look different for a company of Trellis' size, but, I think we're lucky because we have HR VPs, that are HR business partners that are they're aligned to our functional departments. And so they're in, daily, really close contact with our business leaders. So, and we have a fantastic relationship, which I know I feel fortunate to be able to say that. I know that's not always the case, especially with finance and HR, but we have a really good relationship. So I do think we have a really open line of communication here. But I think for us, the success factor there is our HR business partners who are aligned and they're deeply integrated into their functions. So they are lockstep with those leaders. So they're hearing that information, honestly, before I am, but they're really good at bringing it back and saying, look, we're seeing these shifts that require rethinking our how we plan for talent, our workforce planning, and it's just a constant loop of communication. And we have weekly touch points with our FP&A and finance teams, and then our HRBPs are really integrated with the business. And to me, that I think is the number one thing that makes those conversations easier and help us keep very closely aligned. But for me, it's all about workforce planning and making sure that we're constantly reevaluating, do we have the right resources for the work? And as these dynamics, the external market dynamics are making things that a more challenging exercise. But just that relationship that we have and that integration with HR and the business is critical. So I'm a big proponent of the model of having very integrated, embedded HR folks out in the business. Because otherwise, I think you're going to miss some of that discussion.
Right. And you make good decisions.
Yeah.
Yep. Startups are little known, right? We can sometimes be great needles in the haystack. Do you have any tips for how fintech founders can attract, especially in fintech where you may be back end, so consumers may not know about your service or solution? How do great employers get discovered? What are tips for recruiting when you don't have people just inundating your careers page?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, and I've been there. I think one is leverage the social channels that you do have, because right now, especially as you look for talent that's in that kind of Gen Z, cusp of millennial, and even younger. I mean, technology is their love language. It's their language. That's how they communicate. So social media channels that are free or at very low cost to you all, like a LinkedIn, Glassdoor. What I'm seeing is candidates still look at those sources for information. So do you have a culture page built out on LinkedIn? Do you have your about the leadership page? And do you have things that give potential candidates a glimpse into what it would really be like to work somewhere, or at Trellis in this example? So I think that's really important and fairly low lift. But you have to, in order to make those pages come to life and give that vision of what it's actually like to work there, you do have to have a distinct kind of culture and way that you can articulate your culture out to the broader world. So I'd say, investing in a core set of principles or values, making it clear for what you stand for as an organization that then you can put out and repeat in these social avenues is really important. Because basically, if, it's not just startups, but a lot of companies can't compete just dollar-wise, cash for cash with a Google and a Facebook. So it's that, what other reason would folks want to come work for you, and make that known across those channels is one of the ways that I've seen. Because believe it or not, money isn't the number one reason people join a company. Right?
What's the number one reason?
Culture. What they believe and perceive that it'll be like to work there on an everyday basis. Do you believe and care in the things that they value, whether that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whether it's about your core principles aligned with their core beliefs, that you care about social impact or sustainability efforts? That is the number one reason folks join a company these days.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And how do you reinforce, one struggle challenge that we've been dealing with is the question of how do you execute an interview or hiring process that balances the bilateralism of the dynamic where you're trying to get to know, is this candidate great, but then they're trying to get to know if you're great. And it can kind of be this tussle, and oftentimes the now it's your turn can be squished into 5 minutes at the end, and they don't get a great flavor and feel like they were machine gunned to death with questions. How do you balance that in the interview process? Do you ask every interviewer to spend half the time talking about Vimeo, or is it there's specific segments of the day that are more about Vimeo and other parts that are more about the candidate? How do you allocate that time?
Well, I mean, I don't know that we've got it perfect either, because I actually think that's a really tough challenge to solve for. I mean, the basics, we do recommend that everyone leaves at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end of every interview to let the candidate ask you questions, because it definitely is a two-way street. You want them to want you as much as you want them, and to understand what they're walking into and have a really clear picture. But one thing we do is we actually have, like, we do a lot of our interviews based on our principles, which we have instead of values. And we, so we kind of allocate the questions to the interview panelists of, like, we want you to focus on, be real. And that means, how do they communicate with clarity and authenticity and whatever it may be. Or this one's really around strategy, which ties to kind of our innovation principle. And so we want you to ask in this area. So we also kind of give folks guidance on the areas we want them to probe. So one, you, from the company perspective, have a wide breadth, and no one doubles up on asking the same person, the candidate, to talk about just their background for 5 times in a row, where you don't learn something new. So we really try to hone in on what's most important for this role, and considering our principles, and then make sure everyone has a different angle that they're coming at. And I'd say, like, to the extent possible, the diversity of who you have interview your candidate tells a little bit more to them too than, just having open questions at the end. So being mindful of, are you putting, any sort of diversity in front of your candidates in terms of roles or gender or any other demographic, but otherwise, just making sure that diversity is there.
Cool. I've got 3 tactical questions for you.
All right. Fire away.
All right. Machine gun them at you.
Yeah.
So one is walking candidates out of a failing interview process. Do it or don't do it?
Oh, like mid-interview?
Not mid-interview, but like mid-interview day, mid-panel. Do you say, oh, geez, this is a waste of the candidates and our time, like this isn't a fit? Or is that disrespectful? Is it disrespectful not to walk them out when you know it's a lost cause? Or is it disrespectful to walk them out because they allocate the time to you?
I think if it's very clear to you that it's okay to walk them out in a very respectful way, because I think, no sense in, I'm a big proponent of transparency. And so if we don't think it's a good fit early on, and we recognize that, don't waste their time nor yours. But, I do think in those situations, it's great to give the candidates on the spot feedback. So my only recommendation there would be to make sure you share some feedback on why they, maybe didn't pass the interview with as much clarity as you feel comfortable sharing.
Okay, that's the great next segue to candidate feedback. Give it, or too much of a liability?
No, give it. But, again, I'd say these all have guardrails around them. You want to give it to it, again, in a constructive, healthy way. And so making sure that it doesn't, I also recommend not the sandwich. I definitely don't love the sandwich approach, but make sure you share, this is what did work and we did enjoy, but ultimately this was the feedback of why, you're not going to move forward. I think that's helpful. As a candidate, I always appreciate hearing the feedback, whether or not it's easy to hear. That's a different story.
Okay. Candidate roundtables, do them, or are they just a place for people to vent biases? This is a post-interview day, everybody talking about what they thought about the candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to be structured, but I've seen them be really effective when done well. So I think as long as you have a forum in which a consistent way in which people share their feedback is helpful. So you're comparing kind of apples to apples to the best you can in that forum. But I think if you're engaging a panel, you want to make sure you hear back from everyone and everyone has a chance to voice their opinions. But I'd say structure it and put guardrails around how people present their feedback on that candidate to make sure it stays effective and not repetitive.
Performance improvement plans. Some people think that they should be required. Other people think that they're always a waste of time and no one's ever going to pass through them. Some people think it depends on the situation. Yeah. What's your policy on that?
Look, we use performance improvement plans at Vimeo, and we use them with the intent they are to improve someone's performance. So we have a decent track record of folks coming out of their performance improvement plans and being wildly successful and having incredible impact here. So I'd say it depends on your culture of what you're trying to, drive and instill. But I think if the way they're intended generally is to actually improve the performance, and it just provides structure and guardrails to help the manager be more effective at setting very, very clear expectations for your team member that might be struggling. And most often we find it is a lack of expectation setting up front that's causing a lot of that friction. So I'm pro.
All right. And the last one is employee onboarding. Obviously, you should do employee onboarding. Yeah. But what are two things that people may not be doing today in their employee onboarding that you think are crucial?
That's a good one. I think onboarding can be very tactical, which there is a tactical element of it that needs to take place to literally get the employee set up to do the work. But I think it's also the opportunity to create that buy-in and excitement for what the company stands for and what the company values from day one. So I think I typically see folks underinvest in that cultural immersion. Like these are the things that matter to us, whether it's our values and principles or, the way we work or whatever makes you different. That's really important to the success of employees. Like make that known up front. Like more clear expectation setting and onboarding is helpful. Plus that, like, if you care about something deeply, making it known from day one that employees know this matters to you is a great opportunity in onboarding.
Okay. On to back to strategic questions.
Okay.
Who's in charge of hiring? Hiring managers or talent?
I think the ownership sits in the hiring manager, right? They're the ones that know what they need from the business. And like if you're doing workforce planning correctly, you're looking at boxes on your team, taking people out of the equation, right? And you're looking at what roles do I need on my team to reach our goals, to achieve our strategy. And then you define the requirements of that role. And then you go make sure you go find whether internally or externally, you have the right person for that role. So TA is going to help do the heavy lifting because the talent acquisition team is going to go out and take your really clear requirements and go source for you and screen folks to make sure they only put the best in front of you. But it's ultimately the hiring manager's decision and their responsibility to hone in on exactly the qualifications and the requirements that would make a person wildly successful in that role. So I say more ownership on the hiring manager for sure.
And who's in charge of retention?
We all
hiring managers or talent?
Definitely not talent, because I think it is, every single manager and leader needs to be responsible for retention. Obviously, we track it and we hold kind of the key, like it's one of our biggest metrics in HR that we always look at is our attrition and retention, and then specifically our voluntary and regrettable. So are we losing those people that are having the greatest impact or we're doing something wildly wrong? But and typically when you look at exit survey data and why people leave companies, it is, top 3 reasons are generally their direct manager and their manager not giving them what they need or being as strong of a leader, or it's like growth and development, promotion opportunities, things like that. And again, pay is usually a little bit lower on the list, but it's usually either direct manager or career growth aspirations aren't met.
Interesting. Yeah. So leaders often feel that HR hasn't had an equal seat at the table with those managerial functions, product, engineering, marketing. What do you view as the value prop of the people function, and why should fintech leaders invest to it, especially after they hit 100 people? What are they going to be getting out of that people function as they craft it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is not a popular opinion from an HR person, but I don't think they're wrong. Business leaders aren't wrong for historically thinking that. Like we've given them every reason to think that, because HR traditionally has been a very much like a check the box policy compliance organization. And we haven't forced ourselves to have a seat at the table or earned our seat at the table historically, because we haven't provided the value and the impact that you would expect to see. And so I think where we can provide the greatest value is by helping you really solve for and plan for, your toughest challenges around your people. That's what we should be doing. It's not about like making sure someone read some policy or that, yes, we have to do the policy compliance part, but that's not where we add value. It's, coming to a leader to help them rethink their organizational structure and design. Have they thought around, the challenges that they're facing from a people and cultural standpoint that we can help solve for. I think that, we need to show up differently to, earn the respect of leadership to some degree and like have that seat at the table by, providing more strategic value. Because, I read this quote somewhere, I can't remember who said it, so I can't attribute it to the right person, but it's something like, you don't actually build a business, you build the people that build the business. And that's why if we're doing our job right, we're building we're bringing in incredible talent, and then we're fostering them to have an incredible impact at your company through growth and development, through a, really I don't know, effective performance process, all of that, we're bringing in diverse talent. And that's like the role that we should be playing. So I think we have some work to do to demonstrate our impact.
Standardization. At a company like Vimeo, how many engineers do you have?
Oh,
hundreds?
A couple hundreds, yeah. Yeah.
Hundreds, okay.
Hundreds.
It probably is the case that you have different engineering managers who value different aspects of prospective hires. How important is it, as any given engineering manager is hiring, that they conform to a standardized set of corporate values versus get to execute on their vision for what a great engineer is?
I think what I like to do is give flexibility for both, because I think one thing we're not willing to compromise on are our global corporate values, our company values or principles, because they are so important. We think regardless of your role, these are important. We want you to show up and be real. We want you to aim high. Like those are things that no matter what. But we do have, we flex in the process. I think it's really important to say, what does this role need? And what does this leader that's going to be managed, or the manager that's going to be leading this person, need to be effective? And to integrate that is highly appropriate, and we would encourage it, because that's really important. And different roles require different skill sets or a different perspective, or if a hiring manager knows that they know best what they need in that role, so we want them to have that flexibility. But yeah, I'd say with the guardrail of we stay true to what those overarching principles are still really important. We have as many companies do, kind of a no asshole policy. So you have to, our performance process is built around the same thing, where it's weighted 50% on your kind of results and hitting your goals, and 50% on your, how you live our principles or behaviors.
Oh, it's a lot, 50%.
Yeah. We value both, and we're not willing to compromise on the principles piece.
Yeah. And who evaluates the values? Is it the manager just saying you live the values or not?
Yeah, so we have, in our process, we do, self-reviews where you kind of share your own perspective on your performance. We do peer reviews, like 360s for a handful of folks, or from a handful of folks. And then managers do your primary review. And then we also do calibrations. So where we get broader feedback and making sure that we check for bias and, an equitable review process. That's really through the calibration process. But we also allow employees to give upward feedback about their managers, which I love. I think that's an important component.
Interesting. Yeah. At Google, we had the Google Geist. It was a company-wide census. It was hundreds of questions. It took 45 minutes per employee.
And
they reported back to us on the results, and it felt good.
Yeah, we have that too. We have ours is called Voice of the Vimian. We've cut it from 90 questions down to 40, so we're going in the right direction.
There you go.
But yeah, it has an element of manager effectiveness too, and that's great. It can be scary because it's going to surface what's not working in an organization. But, as in my role, I want to know. I'd rather know so we can go fix it and take action on it. And then every manager that, has 5 or more direct reports gets their individualized team results as well. So I think it's a great feedback mechanism and loop.
Cool. So as we wrap up here, who are some people, or what's one person that comes to mind in terms of people who have inspired you and that you think, we should all look to for guidance?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, personally, I have some really strong women in my life that I look to, but from a corporate perspective and kind of work view, it might be recency bias, but I'm very much on a Brene Brown kick. I don't know if you know Brene. She's a Harvard research. She did research. I don't know. She does research somewhere, but she's all about vulnerability, and especially in the workplace. And so she wrote this book, Dare to Lead, that I think really could be a game changer in the way leaders show up, with a different level of vulnerability and authenticity that could really build a basic level of trust that doesn't exist, every day in an organization. So that's one of my latest reads, and sort of, I just watched her Netflix special not that long ago as well. So I think there's a lot we could learn from as business leaders by Brene.
I'll check it out.
You should. Absolutely.
And speaking of vulnerability, one question I've been daring to ask you is, what is a mistake you've made that you'll never make again?
Oh, how much time do we have? I've got a long list. Look, I do have a lot. I think when I was younger, I had this pursuit of perfection. And I think that especially being in the tech industry and at a startup, I think that's actually can be the death of you in that environment. And so I think now I've come, progress over perfection. I'm more into the like, let's iterate and learn and move quickly and like get the MVP out the door, which, that's not me of several years ago. And I think that's a big transition. So I feel like that pursuit of absolute perfection just can't exist in this environment that we're operating in today. We're too fast paced and it just doesn't work in the tech space. That's a big one, I think, that stands out for me.
Have you ever sent an email to the wrong person, maybe about that person?
Oh gosh, I'm sure. I probably block that one out of my mind.
I feel like at some point, you hit like some age and 100% of people have had that happen. You're shoot, I sent it to the person. It was about the person.
Yeah, I've for sure hit reply all and not intended to, or definitely mailed the wrong person.
What's this person saying? Ooh.
Yeah, especially in my role, that's a big watch out because we're usually emailing with some highly sensitive information. I think I might have leaked a report on accident a time or two as well. So I've done my fair share of whoopsies.
Awesome. Okay, last question for you because I know we got to wrap. Company, all hands, particularly in a remote environment. How in a remote environment do you create a sense of community when people are doing this mono audio Zoom call? It's always broadcast communication, right? It's one person talking to another person. It doesn't feel like back in the day in an office where, you're just all there and there's like side conversations. And it feels very like we're watching TV. Which is much more passive, that less engaging activity, especially with video off being kind of half the people in my company are video off. Like, what do you do or what do you propose doing to make it feel like a community?
Yeah. I think there's a lot you need to be doing outside of your town halls or big company meetings. But for those in particular, I would encourage, especially at your size, you probably can still drive some level of engagement, whether you do open Q&A, even Slidos, like a little bit of a safer way where folks can, submit their questions. You can moderate and then choose which ones you want to put through. But I do think, allowing for open dialogue with employees during those town halls can be really effective. Also doing instead of one-way information sharing, how we do with typical slides and whatnot, do something more like a fireside chat where you bring in one or two executives to have more of a conversation where it feels like employees are actually kind of part of the conversation or just sitting on a couch listening to the two leaders chat. I think you have to be really intentional to try to make humanize the folks that are presenting quite a bit. And, whether that's play some music too, share some more personal stories. But that engagement piece, I think, is important. How do you draw the audience in and whether, or maybe you ask them all a check-in question where people pop it in the chat and engage that way. And, if you're really wild, do some breakout rooms. And
have you done that?
Yeah, we have. And you can do it up to quite a few hundreds of folks. So
yeah,
I think that's a good way too. And just say you have to be intentional, but trying to have it feel a little bit more two-way than just that one-way information dump is always helpful.
All right, we have 1 minute left. Is there anything you think people should be thinking about in the talent space right now that they may not be thinking about?
No, the talent landscape is shifting right now, and it's hard to kind of see what's next. But what I can tell you is what's on top of our mind is how do we retain our best talent? That's always going to be an issue, even if the pendulum's shifting a bit. So making sure you're really doubling down on recognition, rewarding your top performers. How do you differentiate your high impact, high talent folks and make them feel rewarded? That's always going to be a challenge. I think hiring and bringing in more diverse talent is an opportunity for every single organization out there. No one has gotten that one 100% right. And just really kind of honing in on the culture and being really intentional about what you're trying to create, and doing that early on is something I think, for you as a startup and folks of your size should really be thinking about.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Crystal. It was really great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It was a pleasure. Do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely.